James Thompson had always considered himself a practical man, the kind of person who didn't let emotions take control, who didn't let drama or impulses dictate his decisions. His life had been predictable, reliable, and, above all, stable. For years, he had worked as a logistics coordinator at a medium-sized shipping company. Nothing fancy, but steady work. A job he'd climbed up the ladder for, step by small step, not the fastest, but with the reliability of someone who valued consistency. His colleagues at work knew him as a man who could always be counted on, someone who kept his cool in a crisis, who handled responsibilities quietly but effectively. He wasn't one to brag or boast, nor was he one to cause a scene. At home, things were much the same. His wife, Carla, was the center of his life. They'd been married for 12 years, and over that time, their relationship had felt like a well-oiled machine. Their home was always orderly, their finances well managed, their routine predictable. They spent their weekends doing simple things, going to the farmer's market, taking walks in the nearby park, or driving out to their cabin upstate. Life was stable, dependable, no surprises. James had built a life he was proud of, even if it wasn't one that made headlines or turned heads. He didn't need excitement. He had everything he needed in Carla, in the peace of their home, in the quiet rhythm of their daily life. But as he sat in his truck in the driveway that evening, something felt off. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he looked at the unfamiliar car parked in front of his house. It wasn't her car. It wasn't his either. It was a newer model, sleek and shiny in a way that was out of place for the street they lived on. A luxury vehicle, if you could even call it that. James squinted at the car as his thoughts turned over. Could it be someone else from the neighborhood? Maybe a friend of Carla's? Maybe she was out for a meeting or something. But something in his gut told him otherwise. Something didn't feel right. He shook his head, dismissing the thoughts as nonsense. He had a promotion to celebrate. The kind of promotion that didn't come easily in his industry. One that would finally put him in a position to have more freedom, more financial security, and maybe even allow him to do more for Carla. She deserved it. All the long days, the nights he worked late, the sacrifices they'd both made over the years. Today, he'd received the confirmation. His efforts had paid off. As James entered the house, his first instinct was to call out, "Carla." He felt the words leave his mouth with an unfamiliar edge. Something was definitely wrong. Usually when he came home, Carla was right there, either in the kitchen or on the couch watching TV, maybe folding laundry or reading a book. Their lives had always been intertwined by routine. There was comfort in that. But tonight, nothing. The house was eerily quiet. It almost felt empty. James glanced around. The lights were on in the kitchen, but there was no sound. No clinking of dishes, no hum of the refrigerator. There was a slight smell of something in the air, maybe a cooking smell, but there were no signs of dinner being prepared. Just an unsettling silence. His stomach churned in the absence of the usual warmth. "Carla!" His voice was louder this time. He hadn't even realized he was walking deeper into the house, through the foyer and into the living room. The TV was off. The couch was untouched, the cushions still fluffed, the coffee table neatly arranged. Everything was in its usual place. But no Carla. His eyes scanned the room again, expecting to catch some small detail, some sign that she had been here recently. The faintest sound. But there was nothing. It wasn't until he stood by the hallway that something else caught his attention. The bedroom door, slightly ajar, was the only thing that seemed different. Normally, Carla would leave the door open a crack if she was in there, or sometimes it would be fully closed if she had been cleaning or organizing, but this felt off. James hesitated for a second. It wasn't like him to get anxious, but the tension building in his chest felt unnatural, like a pressure he couldn't shake. He was about to turn back, to let it go, to chalk it up to his overactive imagination, but something about the quiet was too thick. He had to know. Without thinking, he stepped toward the bedroom door and pushed it open slightly, just enough to peer inside. He froze. Carla was in their bed, but she wasn't alone. Tom, their neighbor, no, scratch that, the man who had helped them move in when they first bought the house, the one who'd come over with tools to fix a leaky pipe, the man who had been friends with James for years, was lying next to her naked. And they weren't just lying next to each other, either. They were tangled up together. The bed was a mess. The sheets were thrown off, twisted, and scattered in chaos. Tom's hand was resting on Carla's bare shoulder, his fingers tracing her skin lightly, while Carla, wide-eyed with panic, seemed frozen in place. They didn't see him at first, but when they did, when their eyes locked with his, everything seemed to stop. James's mind went blank. He could barely process what was happening. This wasn't real. This had to be some kind of sick joke, some twisted nightmare. But no, it was real, and it was unfolding in his home, with the woman he had married, the woman he'd trusted, and the neighbor he had shared beers with on weekends, the man who had once helped him fix a broken fence. His body moved before his brain could catch up with the situation. Without a word, without a thought, his foot slammed into the door, flinging it open with force, the sound echoing in the silence of the room. Carla flinched, trying to pull the sheets over her body, her face paling with a mix of guilt and fear. Tom jumped out of bed, scrambling for his clothes. The whole scene felt like it was happening in slow motion. "James, please wait. It's not what you think," Carla stammered, her voice desperate. She looked at him, her face contorted in panic. James's blood was boiling. He could feel the heat rush to his face, his fists tightening at his sides. He couldn't think straight. All he could feel was a deep, suffocating rage. "Not what I think. You gotta be kidding me. Do you think I'm stupid? You think I didn't see what was going on here?" James shot back, his voice thick with disbelief and anger. "You think you can do this to me and just what? Apologize and pretend it never happened?" Carla looked away, tears streaming down her face. "James, please, she broke off, unable to finish. But James wasn't waiting for her explanations. He had heard enough. He wasn't some naive fool who could just sit there and listen to lies anymore. The rage was burning, filling his chest and throat. His thoughts were racing, but they all came back to one thing: betrayal. Pure and simple. And that was something James Thompson could not and would not forgive. "I trusted you," he snarled, his eyes cold and furious as he locked eyes with Carla. "I trusted you with everything I had. My career, my life, and my future. You made a damn fool of me." For a brief moment, Carla reached out for him, her fingers trembling. "James, please don't leave me. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. It's Tom's fault. James's voice cut through her apology like a knife. "Shut up. Don't say another word. You've already ruined everything." He didn't need her apologies. Not anymore. The room felt colder now, as if every shred of warmth had been drained from the space. James turned on his heel and walked out of the room without another word. His fists were still clenched, his body shaking with barely controlled fury. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. He had a plan, and Carla was going to regret this betrayal. James stood outside the bedroom door for a long moment, fists clenched by his sides, trying to contain the storm inside him. Shock still gripped him, but underneath it was something worse. A deep, burning rage. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. Carla, his Carla, had been with Tom in their bed in the home they had built together. It didn't make sense. But then again, none of this made sense. The car in the driveway, the silence in the house, the absence of Carla when he had called out for her. Everything suddenly fit together in a sick, twisted puzzle. And now, standing there in his own house, with his trust shattered and his life turned upside down, the anger surged. He turned back toward the living room. Carla's voice, weak and panicked, echoed in his mind. "Please, James. I can explain. I never meant for this to happen." James clenched his jaw, his steps heavy as he walked back into the living room. It was the same living room he had spent countless hours in, watching TV, sharing stories, and relaxing after long days. But now everything felt alien. His world had been turned upside down in a matter of seconds. Carla had followed him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. "James, please," she began again, but he cut her off before she could finish. No, his voice was colder than he intended, but the anger felt like fire in his chest. "Don't even try to explain. I've had enough of your lies, Carla. I've had enough of everything." "James, please, I didn't mean for this to happen," Carla said, her voice cracking as she reached for him, her hand trembling. She stepped closer, desperation written all over her face. We've been going through a rough patch, and I— Stop. James's voice was a low, harsh growl. Don't try to tell me this is some rough patch, Carla. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some slip-up. You've been sleeping with Tom for who knows how long. Carla's face crumpled as if the weight of his words were suffocating her. She opened her mouth to speak, but James was done listening. He turned away from her, pacing around the living room, his thoughts in a frenzy. How long, Carla? He demanded, his voice quieter but no less intense. How long have you been doing this behind my back? Carla's eyes welled up with tears, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake, just a stupid mistake. A mistake? James echoed, his fists tightening again. He was beyond furious now, the words barely escaping through gritted teeth. Is that what you call it? A mistake? You've been having sex with my damn neighbor, and that's just a mistake to you? I never meant for it to go this far, Carla said, her voice a hollow whisper. Tom, you made me feel seen. I was feeling lost, and she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The confession hung in the air, thick with shame. But James wasn't interested in hearing the details. He had already heard enough. It hit him now. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to him, pretending everything was fine, pretending their marriage was healthy? He had been blinded by trust, by the mundane comforts of their life. He had let her get away with everything, thinking it was all just the regular ebb and flow of a long marriage. He turned back toward her, the fury boiling up again. You're telling me you didn't know what you were doing? He spat, the words bitter and sharp. You didn't know what you were doing when you opened your legs to Tom? Carla flinched, her face pale with shame, her eyes avoiding his. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. James wasn't going to let her off easy. Not now. Not after everything. Tom, he muttered darkly. What the hell was going through his head? How did you think he'd feel? Was he just as guilty as you? Or was he laughing at me this whole time? What did he think I wouldn't notice? I didn't want this, Carla said again, her voice trembling as she stepped closer to him. I didn't want to hurt you, James. I swear, I didn't want to destroy our marriage. Then why the hell did you do it? James's voice cracked as his anger turned to frustration. You think I'm stupid? You think I couldn't tell something was wrong? Carla bit her lip and stepped back, as if the distance between them was the only way to protect herself. James saw it, the guilt on her face, the remorse, the fear. But it wasn't enough. This wasn't just about a betrayal of trust. This wasn't just about a relationship that had been fractured by one night or a few reckless decisions. This was something far worse. This was the complete destruction of everything they had built. The trust he had invested so much of himself in, the faith he had in her, had all been taken away in an instant. And now, she was begging for him to understand? I should have seen it, James said under his breath, more to himself than to Carla. I should have known. There's always been something off. I just didn't want to see it. I let myself believe we were fine. Carla took a step forward, her hands clasped tightly together. James, please, we've been through so much together. I know I made a huge mistake, but I love you. I want to fix this. James turned sharply to face her. The anger was still there, but now there was something else, cold resolve. He was done with the excuses. He was done with the apologies. Fix it, he repeated, incredulous. How the hell are you going to fix this, Carla? You've already destroyed it. You've already ruined everything. And now you want to pretend like we can just go back to the way things were. She was crying now, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. I'll do anything to make it right. Just please don't leave me. But James didn't move. He didn't react to her tears, to the desperation in her eyes. His mind was already working, plotting the next steps. He wasn't going to let this slide. Not now. Not after everything. The woman who had been his partner, the woman he had trusted with his life, had violated that trust in the most intimate way possible. And she thought a few tears and some empty promises would make it right? No, he said coldly. You don't get to do this to me. You don't get to destroy everything we've worked for and then beg me to forgive you. He paused, taking a deep breath. I'm done. Carla reached out again, trying to touch him, but James stepped back, his chest tight with anger. He could see her struggling, could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. I'm done, Carla, he repeated, his voice unwavering. And don't even think about asking me to forgive you. This is over. Carla's face crumpled as the reality of his words settled over her like a weight. No, please, she whispered, barely audible. Please don't do this, James. I love you. I'm so sorry. But James wasn't listening anymore. He had already made up his mind. There was nothing left to say. The years they had spent together, the life they had built, had all been shattered in a single moment. And he wasn't going to give her the chance to destroy him even further. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room. He couldn't stand to be in the same house as her for another minute. He needed space to think, to plan. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. James sat in the study, his fingers drumming on the polished oak surface of the desk. The sunlight from the window softened the harsh edges of the room, but it couldn't mask the heaviness in his heart. The weight of Carla's betrayal was like a boulder lodged in his chest, suffocating him slowly. The confrontation had happened hours ago, but the sting of it hadn't dulled. If anything, it had intensified. The image of her and Tom, his so-called friend, still burned in his mind like a brand. In his bed, the bed that was supposed to be a sacred space. How many nights had they spent there, laughing and making plans for the future? How many shared moments did she throw away, just like that? Her words replayed in his mind, her attempts to justify it, her pleading, her eyes wet with tears as she tried to explain how it just happened, as if that somehow made it better. He had never seen Carla like this. The woman who had once held herself with grace and dignity, who had been his partner in all things, now felt like a stranger, a deceitful stranger. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't reconcile the woman who had once promised him forever with the one who had so carelessly betrayed him. The anger that surged in him was so intense, it was almost physical, but there was something colder beneath it all. A calm rage, a slow burn that was not about throwing things, not about shouting or confronting her again. This was about action. James wasn't about to let this go. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with his life, had turned him into a fool. But she wasn't going to walk away unscathed. This was no longer about saving the marriage. It was about justice, revenge. And James was nothing if not patient. It didn't take long for him to form the outline of his revenge. He didn't need to act impulsively. No, he was going to be precise, methodical. He had built a life with Carla, and now he would destroy it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. James leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk as he mapped out his next moves. The first thing was the money. Carla had always been the one who spent freely. Even when they'd argued about finances, it was always the same. Her spending habits were reckless, but he had never stopped her. They had always had enough, and she had always known how to manipulate the situation when it suited her. Not anymore. It was time to take control. He had accounts she didn't know about, investments he had made over the years without telling her. It wasn't illegal. He had the right to them, just as much as she had the right to the shared savings. But James wasn't going to make it easy for her to walk away with anything. He grabbed his phone, opened a secure app, and began transferring funds. Small amounts at first, so there was no immediate red flag. He would drain the accounts slowly, carefully. She would think it was a mistake at first. Maybe she would think they were just bad investments. But James knew. She wouldn't get a penny more than what she was entitled to. And that was going to be nothing. The idea of Carla, out there in the world with her lifestyle shattered, made him feel better. But it wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. Carla had always relied on the security James had given her. Her comfort was built on his hard work, his discipline, his foresight. That was the first thing James would take away. But he wouldn't just take the money. No, he was going to dismantle everything that made her feel safe. She would think it was an oversight. She would think, in her selfishness, that maybe she had time to fix things. Maybe she could convince him to forgive her. Maybe she could start a new chapter, one where she kept all the comfort she had grown accustomed to. But James wasn't about to let her get off that easy. The house, their home, was the next logical step. It had been their sanctuary, their foundation. Now it would be her prison, a constant reminder of her infidelity. The house was too expensive, too lavish, for a woman who had sold her soul. It needed to be taken away. James reached out to his lawyer. A simple call was enough. The house would be reappraised. The terms of their joint ownership would be reevaluated. He wasn't going to let her stay there. The property was in both of their names, but James would make sure the house became part of the legal battle. If Carla was smart, she would realize the implications of losing everything that had made her feel secure. The lawyer advised him that, under the right circumstances, he could force Carla to leave the home, to relinquish her claim on the property, especially after what had happened. James didn't need to tell the lawyer everything. He didn't need to explain how it all unfolded, but he could hear the understanding in the man's voice. It wasn't going to be easy for her. Not anymore. This wasn't going to stay between them. Carla had humiliated James, dragged his reputation through the dirt with her deceit. She thought she could just have her affair in secret, keep up the charade, and nothing would change. But James wasn't going to be a passive participant in his own destruction. Public exposure. That was the next part of the plan. The idea was not just to ruin Carla's image, but to destroy her standing in their community. People would talk. Friends, family, their neighbors. They would all hear about her infidelity. And not just any infidelity. No, this was personal. This was betrayal in the most intimate, most cruel way possible. She had crossed a line, and now she would be forced to face the consequences of her actions. James knew people. He knew exactly how to spread the word. The affair wouldn't be a whisper in the corner of a room. No, it would be a loud, jarring announcement. The community would know exactly who Carla was now. He wasn't going to make it look like an accident. No, he would place the evidence in the hands of the people who mattered most. He would start with Tom's wife. He would make sure she knew exactly what had happened under her own roof. If anyone deserved to suffer the fallout, it was her as well. She wasn't innocent in all of this. But it wasn't just about Carla. Tom, the neighbor who had made a fool of him, would also have to pay. James would make sure the truth about their affair reached his coworkers, his friends. He would ensure that Tom faced the same public shame. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. If Tom thought he would walk away without consequences, he was sorely mistaken. James didn't just want to ruin Carla's life. He wanted to make sure Tom felt the heat too. He had connections in finance. He had worked in the industry for years, and he knew the pressure people like Tom were under. They didn't expect to be dragged into a scandal. They didn't expect their private lives to become public. And they certainly didn't expect to lose everything because of a single, foolish decision. James made a few calls. He reached out to old friends, acquaintances who owed him favors. The whispers would start. Tom's affair would be common knowledge in the corporate world. It wouldn't take long before someone from the higher-ups decided Tom wasn't worth the risk. James wasn't in it for a simple slap on the wrist. Tom's career would end. He was going to lose his job, his social standing, and his reputation. James loved his children. They were his everything. But Carla had shown her true nature. And now it was time for them to know who their mother really was. The kids had always adored Carla. They didn't know the cracks that had been forming in their family, the lies their mother had told, the ways she had betrayed them. But now they would. James wasn't going to sugarcoat it for them. They needed to understand what had happened. They needed to see Carla for who she really was. He would sit them down. He would tell them, calmly, what had gone on. The affair, the lies, everything. It would hurt them, yes, but they had to know. James wasn't going to shield them from the truth. Not anymore. James felt a surge of cold satisfaction as the last wire transfer was confirmed. The money was moving quietly out of accounts Carla had thought were secure. His hands weren't trembling with rage anymore. No, this was something else entirely. This was control. Justice. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision settling over him. Carla thought she could walk away from this with everything she had. She thought he would sit back and forgive her, like a fool. But James was done. This wasn't about saving the marriage or fixing things. This was about payback, and she had no idea what was coming. The first step had been simple enough. He started with their joint accounts, moving money into his personal savings, his private assets, the ones she didn't know about. Years of careful planning, small investments, things she had never bothered to ask about. Things she'd taken for granted because she trusted him. James chuckled bitterly. Trust. She had betrayed it, and now it was his turn. He wasn't being reckless about this either. Carla wouldn't notice the money missing right away, but in a few weeks, when she started to wonder about the mistakes on her credit card bills or the bills that never seemed to add up, it would be too late. By then, the foundations of her little fortress would be crumbling, and there would be nothing left for her but regret. But money alone wasn't enough. The next part of James's revenge plan was just as crucial. He couldn't allow Carla to stay in the house they had built together. That house was a symbol, a place where they had shared their lives, their memories, and their promises. Now it was nothing more than a reminder of betrayal. Carla had spent the day out with her friends, shopping, of course, a distraction from the reality she'd helped create. He had been watching her carefully all week, noting how she tried to keep things normal. But James knew it was only a matter of time before the cracks started to show. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Not after what she'd done. He had made sure to arrange everything with his lawyer beforehand. It wasn't a decision James made lightly, but Carla had given him no choice. The house, their home, was going to be the first thing she would lose. The legal process had begun. James had carefully orchestrated it, so Carla wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. The lawyers had sent the initial letters, the ones stating that the property was being reevaluated due to irregularities in their joint financial agreements. It wasn't going to be an easy divorce, and James was more than prepared to fight for his rights. James's mind was already moving to the next step of the plan. Carla had humiliated him, but he wasn't about to let her off the hook. She wasn't going to get to walk away with any semblance of dignity. Everyone would know what she had done. He had a few choices on how to go about it. Carla had always prided herself on being the picture of elegance, of class. She had surrounded herself with people who admired her, friends, family, co-workers, people who thought she was above reproach. But James wasn't about to let her live that lie anymore. The first call he made was to their next-door neighbor, Stephanie, who had been friendly with Carla for years. Stephanie was the one who would spread the word. Carla had no idea how much information she had shared with Stephanie over the years, and now that knowledge would be used to expose her. "I need you to know something," James said, his voice steady calm. "It's about Carla and Tom. You're not going to like it, but you need to know the truth. I've already spoken to Tom's wife, and she's going to find out too. The affair, it was under my roof." There was a long pause on the line before Stephanie responded, her voice stiff with disbelief. "What?" "James, no, this can't be true." "Carla." "It is," he cut her off. "And now I want you to spread the word. I don't care how it gets out, but people need to know who Carla really is. She's been lying to everyone, including you." Stephanie hesitated. This is a lot. I don't know if I should. I'm asking you to do this, Stephanie. Don't think about it. Just do it." James's tone was unwavering, and it left no room for argument. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about justice. Carla had built her world on lies, and now it was time for those lies to be torn down. By the end of the day, James knew the neighborhood would know the truth about Carla and Tom, and that was only the beginning. James wasn't going to let anyone think Carla could just keep her social circle intact. No one was safe from the truth. Tom, the man who had stolen everything from James, the trust, the years of friendship, the life he had built with his family. Carla wasn't the only one who had to pay. It was time for Tom to face the consequences of his actions. James knew it wasn't going to be enough to just embarrass Tom. He had to destroy his career. Tom had been living under the illusion that nothing could touch him, that his success in the corporate world was a shield. But James knew the cracks in Tom's carefully constructed facade. Tom worked in finance, just like James, and while their professional paths hadn't crossed directly, James knew people who knew Tom well. The financial world was small, especially in a tight-knit community like theirs. James made a call to Martin, an old colleague he had known for years, someone who had connections at the very firm where Tom worked. The conversation was short and to the point, as James relayed everything. Tom's affair with Carla, the betrayal, the emotional destruction it had caused. "You want me to do something about it?" Martin asked, his voice low, but filled with understanding. "You know the kind of power the company wields, James. If I pull the trigger on this, there's no going back for him." "I know," James replied. "I want him gone. He doesn't deserve that job. He doesn't deserve anything." Within 48 hours, The news of Tom's affair would make its way into the company's internal networks. James knew how these things worked. People talked, and in the world of finance, reputations were everything. Tom's career would be destroyed by the sheer force of the scandal. He would be forced to leave, humiliated, disgraced. James had always been a good father. Always. His kids meant the world to him. And yet, in the back of his mind, he wondered whether they would ever understand how far Carla's betrayal had gone. Would they forgive her? Would they side with her when the truth came out? He knew he would never let them choose sides, but he wasn't going to hide the truth from them either. They had to see what had happened. James knew this part wouldn't be easy. It never was, but it had to happen. His children, his son and daughter, deserved to know that Carla was not the woman they had thought she was. They needed to understand that what she had done wasn't just a small mistake. It was a breach of trust that had shattered their family, and that no matter how much she tried to justify it, there was no going back. It was the hardest conversation James had ever had to have. The kids were sitting in the living room, staring at him, their eyes full of questions. They knew something was wrong. "Kids," James started, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen closely. Carla, your mother, she did something very bad, something unforgivable. She had an affair with Tom, our neighbor, and I know this will hurt you both. It hurts me too, but I think it's time you knew the truth." There was a silence, thick and suffocating. His son, Ethan, the older of the two, stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. And his daughter, Emily, started to cry. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. James held his son's gaze, forcing himself to stay composed. "I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at your mother. And she's the one who needs to explain herself, not me." They sat there for hours, talking in soft, aching voices. The kids had questions, but there was no easy answer. In the end, James didn't need to say much more. The kids already knew enough to understand. The last step in James's plan was already in motion: the divorce. His lawyer had already drawn up the papers, detailing the division of assets, the custody arrangement, and the financial settlements. James wasn't just fighting for his dignity. He was fighting for the future of his children, for their security, and for his own peace of mind. He would not let Carla take anything else from him. There was no going back from this. James was determined to make this divorce as public as possible. He wasn't about to let her slink away into the night. No, she would be forced to answer for what she had done, not just to him, but to their entire family. By the time the final papers were signed, James knew one thing for certain: Carla would never again have the life she thought she could walk back into. She would face the consequences of her actions, and James would be there to ensure she understood just how much it had cost her. James wasn't going to let Carla's affair fade into the background. Not after everything she had taken from him. No, her shame needed to be as public as her betrayal, and James had carefully planned out how to make that happen. The family dinner was scheduled for the weekend, one of those obligatory get-togethers they'd had for years. It was supposed to be a simple, casual evening. Food, drinks, light conversation. But James had a different idea in mind. He wasn't going to let it slide by. He wasn't going to pretend this wasn't the final act. He needed everyone to know what had happened and, more importantly, why it had happened. The kids, his sister Karen, and even some of their mutual friends would be at the house. The perfect audience for what was about to unfold. He had sent Carla a simple text that morning. "I'll see you tonight. There's something I need to say." Carla, of course, thought it was just another attempt at reconciliation. But James was far beyond the point of trying to fix things. This was about making sure she never forgot what she'd done. The night began innocently enough. Carla was on her best behavior, charming, attentive, as if nothing had happened. She was even laughing at Ethan's jokes, as if her betrayal was nothing more than a distant memory. But James was already in control of the situation. He was quiet, observing, waiting for the right moment. He wasn't going to give her an inch. As the evening progressed, and after a couple of glasses of wine, James stood up. The room went quiet as he cleared his throat. Carla's smile faded when she saw the look on his face. She was beginning to sense the storm brewing. The kids fell silent, their eyes darting between their parents. James let the tension build for a moment before speaking. "I don't know how many of you have heard about this," James began, his voice steady but laced with an underlying sharpness. "But I think it's time everyone here knew the truth. About Carla. About what she's done." Carla froze, her face paling as she realized what was coming. The others exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of where this was going. Carla opened her mouth to speak, but James raised a hand, silencing her. "Carla has been having an affair with Tom, our next-door neighbor," James said, his voice growing louder with each word. "For months now, under our roof, behind my back, and I don't know what hurts more, what she did to me or what she's done to our family." The shock on everyone's face was immediate. Ethan's face turned red as he looked between his parents. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. Karen, his sister, looked horrified, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. The room was suffocating, each second dragging as the full weight of James's words sank in. "Carla, you thought you could hide this," James continued, turning his gaze onto her. "But now everyone knows. The truth's out, and I'm not letting you walk away with your dignity intact. I hope that when you look around at these people, your friends, your family, you understand what it costs to betray someone who trusted you." Carla opened her mouth to protest, her voice shaking. "James, please, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. It just happened, and it's not what you think." Her attempts to explain only deepened the tension in the room. She was lying, and everyone knew it. Her voice wavered, her composure cracking under the weight of her own guilt. "You don't get to explain yourself, Carla," James said coldly. "You're the one who destroyed this family. You're the one who lied, and you're the one who betrayed us. You don't get to control the narrative anymore." James's eyes flicked to his sister, who was staring at Carla in stunned silence. Then to the kids, their faces pale with shock. Ethan, his son, was the first to speak, his voice breaking with anger and hurt. You knew about this all along? Didn't you, Mom?" Ethan's words cut through the air, raw and painful. "And you kept it from us?" Carla tried to defend herself, but James wasn't having it. "No more lies, Carla. No more. We're done here. You don't get to twist this story. Not tonight." The silence that followed was suffocating. Everyone knew what she was now. Her social mask was gone. James had made sure of it. In the days following the public revelation, Carla's attempts to salvage her reputation were nothing short of pathetic. She tried reaching out to everyone, friends, relatives, even mutual acquaintances, to explain herself. But the damage had already been done. The word had spread faster than she could contain, and no one was willing to listen to her anymore. She started with James's family, the one she had always been closest to. She called Karen, trying to play the victim. "Karen, please, I know I messed up, but you have to understand. It wasn't planned. I never meant to hurt James or the kids. I love them both. I was just, I don't know, confused." Karen, for the first time in their years of knowing each other, didn't buy a single word of it. "Carla, you're a liar. You've always been a liar, but this is unforgivable. You don't get to play the victim here. Not after what you've done." The coldness in Karen's voice was sharp. Carla's attempts to salvage the situation were futile. The family had already sided with James, and now everyone knew that Carla had crossed a line she could never uncross. She turned to friends, sending them long texts, emails, and even letters, pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. But there was no sympathy left. They had all seen through her facade, and now that her affair was out in the open, they saw her for what she really was. Even her relationship with Tom began to crumble. He had been the one who had made her feel alive again, who had given her the attention and excitement she felt she had lost in her marriage. But now, Tom was distancing himself too. He couldn't take the heat. Carla was alone, and she knew it. She turned to James in desperation. "Please," she begged him over the phone one evening. "I'll do anything. We can go to therapy. We can fix this. Just give me a chance to make it right. Please, James, don't leave me like this." But James had already made his decision. He wasn't going to give her another chance. She had already shown him who she truly was, and it wasn't someone he could ever respect again. There was no coming back from this. "You had your chance, Carla," James said bluntly, his voice cold. "And you blew it. You lost everything." The divorce proceedings moved forward with grim efficiency. James's lawyer had made sure Carla had no chance of getting a favorable settlement. The house, everything they had built, was now his. He had made sure to get full custody of the children, and though Carla had fought back, it was all in vain. Her emotional outbursts in court only made her look worse, and she was eventually forced to sign the final papers. She was left with nothing but the bitter taste of her own mistakes. In the end, Carla had lost far more than James ever could have taken from her. Her reputation was in ruins. Her family, her friends, and even Tom had turned their backs on her. She had lost her dignity, her home, and most importantly, her family.